The quiet hum of a snowstorm echoes through a small town, where a struggling single father and his bright-eyed son navigate the simple joys and hardships of life. Just beyond their modest home, a woman from a world of glittering skyscrapers and endless expectations finds herself lost, both literally and figuratively. What begins as an act of kindness on a frigid winter night transforms into a journey of love, sacrifice, and rediscovery. Together, these three lives intertwine in ways none of them could have imagined, proving that the most extraordinary connections often come from the most unexpected places. Are you ready to embark on this heartwarming tale of courage and second chances? If you've ever believed in the power of love to bridge worlds and bring new meaning to life, this story is for you. Don't forget to follow our channel to uncover more stories that warm the heart, spark inspiration, and remind us all of the beauty in the human spirit. Now, let's step into the first chapter of A Struggling Single Dad Helped a Stranger, Then Learned. She's a billionaire who changed his world, where hope begins with a single fateful night. The biting wind howled through the darkened streets, carrying with it the bitter chill of a winter storm. Ethan Cooper pulled his worn jacket tighter around him as he held Lucas's small hand firmly in his. The boy's breath puffed out in visible clouds, a mix of excitement and cold. "Are we almost there, Dad?" Lucas's voice was muffled under the layers of his scarf. Ethan smiled, glancing down at his 8-year-old son. "Almost, buddy. The church is just around the corner. We'll be warm in no time." The church was a beacon of comfort for the Coopers. On winter evenings like this, its warm glow offered more than just shelter. It was a place of hope, familiarity, and the occasional cup of hot cocoa that Lucas always looked forward to. But as they rounded the final corner, Ethan's sharp eyes caught something unusual. A figure sat huddled on the church steps, barely moving. The street lamp's dim light revealed a woman wrapped in a long coat, her head bowed and her shoulders trembling. She seemed so out of place against the cold, harsh night, a vision of elegance marred by vulnerability. "Dad, is she okay?" Lucas asked, tugging on Ethan's hand. Ethan hesitated, scanning the scene for signs of danger. There was none, only the unmistakable fragility of someone who had been sitting there too long. Without thinking twice, he led Lucas closer. "Excuse me, Mom," Ethan called out gently. His voice carried the calm authority of a man used to solving problems. "Are you all right?" The woman flinched at the sound, looking up suddenly. Her face, pale and drawn, was framed by disheveled chestnut hair. Her deep green eyes, striking despite her weariness, darted between Ethan and Lucas. She said nothing at first, her lips pressed into a thin line. Ethan crouched slightly, keeping his tone soothing. "It's freezing out here. Why don't you come inside? The church is warm and you can rest for a bit." "I'm fine," the woman said curtly, her voice clipped and guarded. Her hands clutched the folds of her coat tightly, as if to shield herself from more than just the cold. "Thank you, but I'll manage." Lucas, ever curious and compassionate, stepped forward. "You look really cold, ma'am. My dad always says it's okay to ask for help." His wide brown eyes, so full of innocence, softened the sharp edges of her defensiveness. The woman's expression faltered for a moment, but she quickly shook her head. "I'm fine," she repeated, though her shivering betrayed her words. Ethan exchanged a glance with Lucas, silently urging him to step back. "Look," he said, his tone steady but firm. "I'm not trying to pry. I just know it's dangerous to sit out here in this weather. The church is safe, and I'm sure the pastor won't mind you warming up for a bit." There was a pause, a crack in the silence filled only by the whistling wind. The woman looked down at her gloved hands, her resolve seemingly wavering. Finally, she sighed and rose to her feet. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the storm. Dad was right. Lucas chimed, beaming up at her as Ethan opened the heavy wooden door to the church. Inside, the warm light bathed the room in a golden glow, and the faint scent of pine and candles filled the air. The woman hesitated on the threshold, her eyes scanning the humble yet welcoming interior. Ethan gestured for her to step in further, and she complied, though her posture remained tense. "Take a seat," Ethan offered, nodding toward one of the wooden pews. "I'll grab some blankets. Lucas, stay here and keep her company." Lucas nodded enthusiastically and plopped down beside the woman, his small legs swinging beneath the bench. "What's your name?" he asked, his natural curiosity taking over. The woman hesitated again, as though weighing her words carefully. "Charlotte," she said finally. "Charlotte Bennett." "I'm Lucas," the boy replied cheerfully. "And that's my dad, Ethan. He's the best." Charlotte's lips curved into the faintest smile, her guarded demeanor softening just slightly under Lucas's warmth. Ethan returned a moment later with a thick blanket and handed it to her. "Here," he said, his tone practical yet kind. "This should help." Charlotte accepted it wordlessly, pulling it around her shoulders. Ethan sat a few pews away, giving her space, while Lucas continued to chatter about the church, the town, and his excitement for Christmas. Ethan observed her quietly. She was clearly someone accustomed to a different world. Her coat alone, though, scuffed and damp, was of an expensive brand he recognized from fleeting glimpses in glossy magazines. Yet here she was, sitting in a small-town church with an air of fragility that seemed to weigh heavier than the cold outside. "Thank you," Charlotte said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was quieter now, less guarded. "I didn't mean to seem ungrateful earlier. She trailed off, her eyes darting to the floor. "No need to explain," Ethan replied, his tone steady. "Everyone's got their reasons. I'm just glad you're out of the cold." Charlotte glanced at him, her green eyes searching his face. There was something about Ethan, his calm presence, the way he carried himself, that felt unexpectedly safe. She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter. The storm outside raged on, but inside the church there was a warmth that neither Charlotte nor Ethan fully understood yet. And while Ethan had no idea who Charlotte really was, there was an unspoken connection forming, a fragile beginning to a story neither of them could foresee. The soft glow of the church lights gave way to the cool, crisp air as Ethan led Charlotte and Lucas toward his small home. The sound of their boots crunching through the thin layer of snow filled the quiet night. Charlotte followed a few steps, behind, her thoughts swirling. She wasn't sure why she had agreed to go with them. Perhaps it was Lucas's infectious warmth, or maybe it was Ethan's calm, reassuring demeanor. Either way, she found herself intrigued by these strangers. "Is it far?" Charlotte asked, her voice breaking the silence. "Not far," Ethan replied without turning around. "Just a few blocks. It's modest, but it's warm." Lucas skipped alongside his father, occasionally glancing back at Charlotte. "You'll like it. Dad makes the best hot chocolate. He even lets me put extra marshmallows when it's really cold." Charlotte's lips curved into a faint smile. "That sounds nice." When they reached the small house, Ethan opened the door and stepped aside to let Charlotte and Lucas enter first. The warmth hit her immediately, a welcome contrast to the biting wind outside. The house was modest, as Ethan had said, but it radiated a cozy charm. A small living room with mismatched furniture, a few framed pictures on the wall, and a Christmas tree in the corner, decorated with handmade ornaments. All signs of a home built with love rather than wealth. "Make yourself comfortable," Ethan said, shrugging off his coat and hanging it by the door. "Lucas, why don't you show Charlotte where she can sit?" "Okay." Lucas darted over to the couch, patting the worn cushions. "You can sit here. It's my favorite spot." Charlotte hesitated for a moment before lowering herself onto the couch, the blanket from the church still draped around her shoulders. The simple gesture of hospitality made her feel oddly at ease. She watched as Ethan disappeared into the kitchen, the clinking of pots and pans signaling his preparation of dinner. Lucas plopped down beside her, his brown eyes wide with curiosity. "Do you like Christmas, Miss Charlotte?" "I do," she replied, though her tone carried a hint of melancholy. "It's a special time of year." "We made those ornaments." Lucas pointed to the tree proudly. "Dad says Christmas is about family and being together." Charlotte followed his gaze, her eyes lingering on the colourful, imperfect decorations. She could tell each one had been crafted with care, likely by Lucas's small hands. A pang of longing tugged at her chest, an unfamiliar ache she couldn't, or quite name. Ethan returned a few minutes later, balancing a tray with steaming bowls of soup and a plate of bread. "It's not much, but it'll warm you up." "It smells wonderful," Charlotte said sincerely, accepting a bowl. The rich aroma of homemade chicken soup reminded her of simpler days, long before her life had been consumed by boardrooms and deadlines. As they ate, Lucas chatted animatedly about school, his friends, and his love for building snow forts. Ethan listened with a smile, occasionally chiming in to encourage his son's enthusiasm. Charlotte found herself captivated by the dynamic between them, the quiet strength of a father doing his best, and the unshakable trust of a child who adored him. "You're a wonderful dad," Charlotte said softly, surprising even herself with the sudden remark. Ethan looked up, his expression briefly tinged with vulnerability before he nodded. "Thank you. Lucas is my world. Everything I do is for him." Charlotte could sense the weight behind his words, the sacrifices he had made. It was a stark contrast to her own life, where she often felt like a lone figure in an endless sea of responsibilities. She didn't know what compelled her to speak, but the words spilled out before she could stop them. "You must miss his mother." Ethan paused, his spoon hovering over his bowl. He took a moment before answering, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. "I do. Every day. She passed away when Lucas was just a toddler. It's been just the two of us ever since." Charlotte's chest tightened at the quiet strength in his tone. There was no bitterness, only a deep, abiding love that lingered despite the loss. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan met her gaze and offered a small, reassuring smile. "Life has a way of throwing curveballs. You just learn to adapt and keep moving forward." For a moment, silence settled over the room, broken only by the crackle of the small fireplace in the corner. Charlotte felt a lump forming in her throat, a rare, genuine connection she hadn't experienced in years. "Enough about me," Ethan said, shifting the focus. "What about you, Charlotte? What brings you to our little town?" Charlotte stiffened slightly, the question catching her off guard. "I just needed to get away," she said vaguely, her gaze dropping to her bowl. "Things have been overwhelming lately." Ethan didn't press her, sensing the hesitation in her voice. "Well, you're welcome to stay as long as you need to catch your breath," he said simply. "Sometimes a little peace and quiet is all it takes to get back on track." His words hung in the air, their sincerity wrapping around her like the warmth of the fireplace. Charlotte nodded, grateful for his kindness, but unsure how long she could keep up the pretense. The life she had left behind felt like a distant memory, yet its weight still pressed heavily on her shoulders. As the evening wore on, Lucas began to yawn, his energy finally fading. Ethan carried him to his small bedroom, tucking him in with a tender care that left Charlotte both moved and envious. When Ethan returned to the living room, he found Charlotte staring at the Christmas tree, lost in thought. "Thank you," she said softly, not turning to face him. "For everything," Ethan shrugged, leaning against the doorway. "It's what anyone would do." Charlotte finally turned, meeting his steady gaze. "Not everyone would." Ethan didn't reply, but the unspoken understanding between them lingered, The warmth of the small house, the simplicity of their connection. It was something neither of them had expected, but both deeply needed. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the small, frosted windows, illuminating the humble home with a golden warmth. Charlotte stirred on the couch, the blanket still wrapped tightly around her. For the first time in a long while, she had slept soundly, the hum of the storm outside replaced by the soft crackle of the fireplace and the distant sound of Lucas giggling. Ethan was in the kitchen, carefully flipping pancakes while Lucas hovered nearby, enthusiastically attempting to set the table. When Charlotte opened her eyes, the sight was almost surreal, so far removed from the sterile, impersonal mornings she was used to in her penthouse. For a moment, she just watched, taking in the simplicity of the scene. "Good morning," Ethan said, noticing her as she sat up. He carried a plate of pancakes to the table and gestured for her to join them. "I hope you're hungry," Lucas piped up, grinning. "Dad makes the best pancakes. You have to try them." Charlotte smiled faintly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Thank you," she said, moving to the table. "This is unexpected." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What is?" "All of this," Charlotte replied, motioning to the breakfast spread and the cheerful atmosphere. "It's nice." "It's just breakfast," Ethan said with a chuckle, but there was a trace of pride in his voice. "Sometimes it's the small things that count." Charlotte nodded, her mind wandering as she tasted the pancakes. They were warm, slightly sweet, and perfect in their imperfection. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply enjoy the meal, savoring the sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. By midday, Charlotte had almost convinced herself that staying a little longer was a practical decision. "I'll leave once the weather clears," she said to Ethan, though her tone lacked conviction. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," Ethan replied easily, not pushing for more details. "But don't think you're getting a free ride. Around here, everyone pitches in." "Pitches in?" Charlotte repeated, raising an eyebrow. Ethan grinned. "We've got some chores to tackle. Don't worry. I'll go easy on you." Charlotte hesitated, but the challenge in his tone was hard to ignore. Before she knew it, she found herself helping Ethan and Lucas with tasks she'd never dreamed of doing. They spent the afternoon repairing a broken step on the porch, Lucas holding the toolbox and offering enthusiastic, if unhelpful, advice. "You're surprisingly handy," Ethan remarked, as Charlotte steadied a board while he hammered it into place. "I learn quickly," she replied, brushing sawdust off her coat. Despite herself, she felt a small sense of accomplishment as the step took shape. Later, in the kitchen, Charlotte helped prepare dinner, a simple vegetable soup that required more chopping than she'd anticipated. Lucas stood on a stool beside her, showing her how to dice carrots without cutting her fingers. His laughter filled the room as she struggled with the task, her usually poised demeanor giving way to an almost childlike amusement. "Not bad," Ethan said when they finally sat down to eat. "You might just survive country living." Charlotte rolled her eyes but smiled, realizing how much she had enjoyed the day. The simplicity of their routine was strangely fulfilling, a stark contrast to the rigid schedules and endless meetings that defined her usual life. That evening, while Lucas played with his toy cars in the corner, Charlotte wandered into a small room off the main hallway. The door had been ajar, and curiosity got the better of her. Inside, the room was cluttered but organized, filled with stacks of paper, a drafting table, and several framed photos on the walls. She approached the table, her eyes drawn to a set of sketches scattered across its surface. The precision of the lines, the intricate details of the designs. It was immediately clear to her that these weren't amateur drawings. She picked one up, studying it closely. It was a blueprint for a building, elegant yet practical, with a Distinctive style that felt both innovative and timeless. You found my old hobby. Ethan's voice came from the doorway, startling her. He stepped into the room, his expression unreadable. This is more than a hobby, Charlotte said, holding up the sketch. These are incredible. Did you... I used to be an architect, Ethan admitted, leaning against the doorframe. A long time ago. Charlotte looked at him, her curiosity deepening. What happened? Ethan hesitated, his gaze drifting to the floor. Life happened, he said finally. After my wife passed, I couldn't keep up with the demands of the job and raising Lucas, so I walked away from it. Charlotte set the sketch down carefully, her chest tightening at the quiet resignation in his voice. That must have been hard. It was, Ethan admitted, but it was the right choice. Lucas needed me, and that mattered more than any career. Charlotte didn't know what to say. She had spent years chasing success, sacrificing relationships, and her own happiness in the process. Yet here was a man who had given up everything for the sake of his son, and he seemed more at peace than she had ever been. You're incredibly talented, she said after a pause. I hope you know that. Ethan offered a small smile. Thanks, but these days, it's just something I do when I have time. It's not exactly practical anymore. Charlotte wanted to protest, to tell him that his talent deserved recognition, but she stopped herself. She could see that the topic was a delicate one for him, tied to memories and sacrifices he wasn't ready to revisit fully. Instead, she said, Lucas is lucky to have you. Ethan's smile widened slightly. I'm the lucky one. As the evening wore on, Charlotte found herself reflecting on the day. The simple routines, the laughter, the moments of unexpected connection, all of it had been far more fulfilling than anything she'd experienced in her carefully curated life. She sat by the fireplace after Lucas had gone to bed, the warmth of the flames matching the quiet warmth in her chest. Ethan joined her, sitting in the armchair across from her. Thank you, she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. For what? He asked. For today, she replied. For letting me be part of it. Ethan shrugged, but his expression softened. Sometimes it's the simple things that make the biggest difference. Charlotte nodded, her gaze fixed on the fire. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace she couldn't quite explain, a fragile, tentative peace that made her wonder what else she might find in this small, unassuming life. The wind howled outside, carrying with it the bitter chill of another winter night. Inside the small house, the warmth of the fireplace cast flickering shadows on the walls. Charlotte sat on the couch, wrapped in one of Ethan's old quilts, her hands curled around a steaming mug of tea. Lucas had gone to bed hours ago, his soft snores a soothing backdrop to the quiet. Ethan sat across from her, his chair angled slightly toward the fire. He had been unusually quiet since Lucas had turned in, his normally steady demeanor tinged with something heavier. Charlotte noticed the way his fingers tapped absently on the armrest, a subtle sign of someone lost in thought. You seem far away tonight, she said softly, breaking the silence. Ethan glanced up, startled for a moment, before offering a small smile. Sorry, just thinking. About what? Charlotte asked, her voice gentle but curious. He hesitated, his eyes drifting to the fire. For a moment, she thought he might brush off the question, but then he sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that comes from carrying a weight too heavy for too long. About my wife, he said finally. His tone was quiet, steady, but layered with an ache that made Charlotte's chest tighten. Charlotte set her mug down, her full attention on him now. You don't have to talk about it if it's too hard. Ethan shook his head. No, it's okay. Sometimes it helps to say it out loud. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the flames, as if drawing strength from their warmth. Her name was Sarah, he began, his voice soft but unwavering. "We met in college. She was studying to be a teacher and I was working on my architecture degree. She had this way of lighting up a room. She could make anyone feel at home no matter where they were." Charlotte could hear the fondness in his tone, the way he spoke as though Sarah were still a part of him, even now. "We got married right after graduation," Ethan continued. "I started working at a firm in the city, and Sarah got a teaching job at a local school. Everything was perfect, or at least as close to perfect as life gets." He paused, his fingers tightening on the armrest. "And then, when Lucas was 2, everything changed. Sarah was driving home one night after a school event. It was raining, the roads were slick. She never made it home." Charlotte's breath hitched, the raw pain in Ethan's voice cutting through her. "Ethan, I'm so sorry," she said, her words feeling inadequate but genuine. Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening as he pushed through the memory. "Losing her was like losing a part of myself. I didn't know how to move forward, how to keep going. But then I'd look at Lucas, and I'd see her in him, her eyes, her smile, her spirit, and I knew I had to figure it out for him." Charlotte watched him, her heart aching for the man who had endured so much. "You gave up your career for him, didn't you?" she asked gently. Ethan nodded again. "I tried to keep working at first, but the long hours, the stress, it wasn't fair to Lucas. He needed me more than any job ever could. So I left. We moved out here to this little town, and I started picking up whatever work I could find. It's not glamorous, but it's enough. And Lucas, he's happy. That's what matters." Charlotte felt a lump forming in her throat. She thought about her own life, the relentless pursuit of success that had left her isolated and unfulfilled. Ethan had sacrificed everything for love, for family, and yet he seemed more at peace than she had ever been. "You're an incredible father," she said softly. "Lucas is lucky to have you." Ethan offered a small smile, but his eyes were shadowed. "I just do what I can. Some days I feel like I'm barely holding it together, but then Lucas will say something or give me one of his goofy smiles, and it reminds me why I'm doing all of this." For a while, neither of them spoke. The crackle of the fire filled the space, a soothing rhythm against the backdrop of their shared silence. Then, almost hesitantly, Charlotte broke the quiet. "I know what it's like to feel like you're running out of yourself," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan looked at her, his expression curious but patient, as though sensing she was about to share something important. "I've been running too," Charlotte admitted. "From my life, from everything that's expected of me, my family, my job. They all see me as this, a pillar of strength, someone who can handle anything. But the truth is, I feel like I'm drowning most of the time." Ethan didn't interrupt, letting her words hang in the air. "My life looks perfect from the outside," Charlotte continued, her voice trembling slightly. "The career, the money, the power, but it's empty. It's like I'm always chasing something I can never quite reach. And the more I chase, the further away it feels." Ethan leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "So, you ran? You came here?" Charlotte nodded. "I didn't know what else to do. I just needed to breathe, to escape. But the truth is, I don't even know what I'm running toward, or if I'm running at all." Ethan considered her words for a moment before speaking. "I can't pretend to know what you're going through, but I do know this. Running doesn't fix anything. Trust me, I tried. After Sarah died, I thought, if I just kept moving, kept myself busy, I wouldn't have to feel the pain. But it catches up with you, no matter how far you run." Charlotte looked at him, his words resonating deeply. "So what did you do?" "I stopped running," Ethan said simply. "I faced it, the pain, the loss, all of it. It wasn't easy, but it's the only way I could move forward. And it's the only way you'll find what you're looking for." Charlotte swallowed hard, his words cutting through the fog of her own thoughts. She wasn't sure she was ready to confront the life she had left behind, but for the first time she felt a glimmer of clarity, a faint but steady light in the darkness. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with more sincerity than she had intended. Ethan smiled, leaning back in his chair. "Any time." The following days were filled with a rhythm of simple routines and unexpected companionship. Charlotte found herself waking each morning to the soft sound of Lucas playing, the aroma of coffee brewing in the kitchen, and the distant hum of Ethan's calm voice as he started his day. It was a life so far removed from the fast-paced world she had left behind, yet it felt more real than anything she had experienced in years. On a brisk morning, Ethan knocked on the guest room door where Charlotte had been staying. "We're heading out to help the Carters today. You're welcome to join us if you're up for it." "The Carters?" Charlotte asked, opening the door. "An older couple down the road," Ethan explained. "Their roof's been leaking for weeks. I promised I'd help patch it up before the next storm." Charlotte hesitated. Manual labor wasn't exactly her forte, but something about the way Ethan phrased the invitation made it hard to refuse. "All right," she said, grabbing her coat, "but don't expect me to be very useful." Ethan chuckled. "Don't worry, I'll find something for you to do." The Carters' home was modest but welcoming, much like Ethan's. Mrs. Carter greeted them warmly, her wrinkled face lighting up when she saw Lucas running up the driveway. "You brought my little helper," she exclaimed, kneeling to embrace the boy. "Of course," Lucas said proudly. "Dad says I'm the best at carrying tools." Ethan exchanged a smile with Mrs. Carter before leading the group to the side of the house, where the damaged roof was clearly visible. "Charlotte, why don't you help Mrs. Carter sort the supplies while Lucas and I get started up there?" Charlotte nodded, grateful for the less strenuous task. She followed Mrs. Carter to the small shed, where they began sorting through buckets of nails and bundles of shingles. The older woman spoke fondly of Ethan as they worked. "That man has a heart of gold," Mrs. Carter said, shaking her head with admiration. "He's always helping someone, no matter how much he has on his plate." Charlotte glanced toward the roof, where Ethan was carefully guiding Lucas through the process of handing him tools. "He's remarkable," Charlotte admitted softly. Mrs. Carter's sharp eyes studied her for a moment. "And you, dear? What's your story?" Charlotte hesitated, caught off guard by the direct question. "I'm just passing through," she said finally, keeping her answer vague. Mrs. Carter gave her a knowing smile. "Well, whatever brought you here, I hope you realize how rare someone like Ethan is." Charlotte didn't respond, but the words lingered as they finished their task and rejoined the others. By midday, the roof was patched, and the group sat together on the porch, enjoying sandwiches and steaming cups of cider that Mrs. Carter had prepared. The air was crisp, the kind of winter chill that made the warmth of their laughter and conversation all the more comforting. As the afternoon sun began to dip, Ethan and Charlotte found themselves lingering near the shed while Lucas played with the Carter's dog in the yard. The quiet gave them space to talk, their earlier teamwork easing the natural barriers between them. "Not bad for someone who claimed to be useless," Ethan teased, his tone light. Charlotte laughed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I had good guidance." Ethan leaned against the shed, his expression softening. "You've adapted well to all of this. I wasn't sure you'd stick around after that first night." "I wasn't sure either," Charlotte admitted. Her voice grew quieter, more introspective. "But this place, the way you and Lucas live, it's different. It's grounding." Ethan studied her for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes simplicity is what we need to see things clearly." Charlotte nodded, but her gaze drifted away, her thoughts clouded by a truth she couldn't share. As much as she admired this life, she knew it wasn't hers. The weight of her secrets pressed heavily on her, dimming the warmth of the moment. Ethan noticed her shift in demeanor. Are you okay? Charlotte hesitated, torn between the growing connection she felt with him and the fear of what would happen if he knew the truth. I'm fine, she said finally, though the words felt hollow. Ethan didn't push, sensing her reluctance. Instead, he offered her a small smile. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. That evening, back at Ethan's house, the fire crackled softly as Lucas drifted off to sleep on the couch. Charlotte and Ethan sat nearby, the silence between them comfortable but charged with unspoken feelings. You know, Ethan began, his voice breaking the stillness, I can't remember the last time I enjoyed a day as much as today. Charlotte looked at him, her heart catching at the sincerity in his words. Me neither, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The flickering firelight danced between them, illuminating the growing bond that neither of them could deny. Charlotte started, her throat tightening. She wanted to tell him everything, about who she was, about the life she had left behind, but the words wouldn't come. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his expression open, waiting. Charlotte. Suddenly, Charlotte stood, breaking the moment. I should get some sleep, she said quickly, avoiding his gaze. Ethan's brow furrowed, confusion flickering across his face. Is everything all right? Fine, Charlotte said, her tone clipped. Good night, Ethan. Before he could respond, she disappeared into her room, closing the door softly behind her. Alone in the quiet, Charlotte leaned against the door, her chest tight with guilt. She couldn't keep hiding the truth, but the thought of shattering the fragile connection she had with Ethan and Lucas was almost unbearable. In the living room, Ethan stared at the closed door, a sense of unease settling over him. He couldn't shake the feeling that Charlotte was holding something back, something that could change everything. The day began like any other. The crisp winter air filtered through the thin curtains as sunlight bathed the small house in a soft glow. Charlotte stood by the kitchen window, sipping her morning tea and watching Ethan and Lucas toss a ball back and forth in the snow. The simple joy on their faces made her chest ache with a mixture of happiness and unease. For days now, she had been grappling with the growing guilt of hiding her identity. She wasn't just Charlotte Bennett, a traveler passing through a small town. She was Charlotte Bennett, CEO of Bennett Enterprises, one of the largest corporations in the country. And sooner or later, the truth would come out. She just hadn't expected it to happen that day. A knock on the door interrupted the morning calm. Ethan, still dusted with snow, called to Charlotte as he stepped inside. Can you get that? Lucas and I are covered in frost. Charlotte hesitated but nodded, setting her mug down and heading for the door. She opened it to find a sharply dressed man standing on the porch, his breath visible in the cold air. Miss Bennett, he said, his voice clipped and professional. We've been trying to reach you for days. Charlotte's heart sank. Her assistant, David. Of course, they'd come looking for her. I'm sorry, you must have the wrong... She began, but David interrupted, his voice growing urgent. Miss Bennett, the board is in an uproar. The shareholders are demanding answers about your absence. We need you back in the city immediately. Behind her, Ethan appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from curiosity to confusion. Charlotte, who is this? David glanced at Ethan briefly before focusing on her again. We've already delayed the quarterly meeting twice. If you don't return soon, we risk losing key investors. Charlotte could feel the color draining from her face as Ethan's gaze bore into her. Charlotte, what's he talking about? She faltered, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. There was no point in denying it now. I'm the CEO of Bennett Enterprises. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stared at her, his expression unreadable. Lucas, oblivious to the tension, ran inside, holding a snowball in his gloved hands. Dad, look what He stopped, mid-sentence, sensing something was wrong. "Lucas, go to your room," Ethan said, his tone unusually sharp. The boy's face fell, but he obeyed without question. Once Lucas was gone, Ethan turned back to Charlotte, his voice low and tightly controlled. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie," Charlotte said quickly, her voice trembling. "I just didn't tell you everything." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "That's the same thing. You've been here for weeks, letting me think you were, I don't know, normal. But the whole time, you're, what, some billionaire running away from your responsibilities?" "It's not like that," Charlotte pleaded. "I needed space. I needed time to think. And you thought it was okay to deceive me while you thought?" Ethan's tone was colder now, his usual warmth replaced with a guarded distance. "I let you into my home. I let you into Lucas's life." "I never meant to hurt you," Charlotte said, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want it to change how you saw me." "Well, it has," Ethan said bluntly. "How could it not? I thought you were different, Charlotte. I thought—" He stopped himself, his jaw tightening as he turned away. Charlotte stepped closer, desperate to bridge the growing chasm between them. "Ethan, please, let me explain." But Ethan shook his head. "I can't do this right now. I need you to leave." The words hit her like a physical blow, but Charlotte nodded, knowing she had no right to argue. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything." Ethan didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the floor. David, who had been standing awkwardly near the door, stepped forward. "Your car is ready, Miss Bennet," he said quietly. Charlotte grabbed her coat and turned to Ethan one last time. "I never meant to hurt you or Lucas. I hope you'll understand that someday." Without waiting for a response, she stepped outside, the cold air stinging her face as she walked to the waiting car. David opened the door for her, and she climbed in, her heart heavy with regret. As the car pulled away, she glanced back at the small house, its warm glow a stark contrast to the icy void she felt inside. Inside the house, Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, his mind racing. He wanted to be angry, to feel betrayed. But beneath the hurt, there was something else, something he couldn't quite name. Lucas appeared at his side, tugging on his sleeve. "Dad, where's Miss Charlotte going?" Ethan looked down at his son, his throat tightening. "She had to leave, buddy." "Will she come back?" Lucas asked, his eyes wide with innocence. Ethan didn't have an answer. "I don't know," he said softly, pulling Lucas into a hug. "I don't know." The city skyline loomed ahead, its sharp edges cutting through the hazy grey clouds of winter. Charlotte leaned back in the leather seat of the car, her eyes fixed on the blur of buildings passing by. Her assistant, David, sat beside her, a tablet in hand, rattling off updates she wasn't truly listening to. "Miss Bennet, the board has been relentless," he said, his tone laced with urgency. "Shareholders are nervous about your absence, and there's a serious rumor that one of our competitors is trying to stage a takeover. We need a strategy." Charlotte's gaze didn't waver from the window. Her mind was a million miles away, back in the warmth of Ethan's small home. She could still hear Lucas's laughter, feel the crackle of the fire, and see the disappointment in Ethan's eyes when her secret had been exposed. "Miss Bennet?" David's voice sharpened, pulling her back to the present. "Schedule the meeting," she said abruptly, her tone flat. "I'll address the board tomorrow." David hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but thinking better of it. He simply nodded, returning his focus to the tablet. Charlotte turned her gaze back to the window, the weight of her double life pressing heavily on her chest. Charlotte's office, perched high above the bustling city, was as pristine and cold as she felt inside. The walls were lined with awards and accolades, evidence of her relentless drive to succeed. Yet standing in the middle of it all, she felt like an imposter. The meeting with the board was tense, Questions flew at her from all sides, concerns about lost revenue, whispers of instability, and thinly veiled criticisms of her leadership. She answered each question with precision, her composure unshakable, but inside she felt hollow. "Charlotte, we need to focus on optics," one of the board members said. "Your absence has made people question your commitment. It's crucial that we project strength and stability." "I understand," Charlotte replied, her voice cool. "I'll handle it." When the meeting finally ended, she retreated to her office, closing the door behind her. Alone, she sank into the chair by the window, staring out at the sprawling city. The view that had once inspired her now felt suffocating. For the first time in years, Charlotte wondered if the life she had built was worth the cost. Meanwhile, the days at Ethan's home were marked by an unfamiliar quiet. Without Charlotte, the house felt emptier, even though Ethan would never admit it aloud. He threw himself into work, taking on extra projects to keep his mind occupied. But no matter how busy he kept himself, thoughts of her lingered. Lucas, however, was far less subtle. "Dad, do you think Miss Charlotte is okay?" he asked one evening as they sat by the fire. "I'm sure she's fine," Ethan replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Lucas frowned. "I miss her, don't you?" Ethan glanced at his son, the innocent question hitting him harder than he expected. He did miss her, more than he wanted to admit. But along with the longing came a wave of frustration and confusion. How could someone like Charlotte, with her wealth and power, understand the life he and Lucas lived? And yet, in the short time she had been with them, she had fit into their world in a way he hadn't thought possible. "Dad," Lucas said, interrupting his thoughts. "Miss Charlotte always said it's okay to make mistakes. Maybe she's waiting for us to forgive her." Ethan looked at his son, surprised by the wisdom in his words. Lucas's simple perspective forced him to confront his own feelings. Yes, he was hurt, but beneath the anger was something else, something undeniable. That night, Ethan sat alone by the fire long after Lucas had gone to bed. He replayed every moment he had shared with Charlotte, from the awkward first night at the church to the quiet evenings by the fire. She had brought something into their lives that he hadn't even realized they were missing. He thought about her vulnerability, the way she had opened up about her struggles and fears. For all her wealth and success, she was just as human as he was, searching for connection, for meaning. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He had been so focused on what she had hidden from him that he hadn't considered why. She hadn't lied out of malice or deceit. She had been trying to protect something fragile, something she wasn't ready to share. With a deep sigh, Ethan made his decision. The next morning, Ethan woke early, his resolve solidified. He prepared breakfast for Lucas, who watched him with wide, curious eyes. "Dad, are we going somewhere?" Lucas asked, as Ethan packed a small bag. "We are," Ethan said, ruffling his son's hair. "We're going to find Miss Charlotte." Lucas's face lit up. "Really? Do you know where she is?" "I have a pretty good idea," Ethan replied, his lips curving into a small smile. "And I think it's time we told her how much she means to us." Lucas grinned, his excitement infectious. "She'll be so happy to see us." Ethan hoped his son was right. As they set off for the city, he couldn't shake the nerves swirling in his chest. But deep down he knew he had to do this, not just for Lucas, but for himself. He had let his fear and pride drive her away, and now it was time to make things right. The grand ballroom was a sea of elegance, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over polished marble floors. The hum of conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses filled the air as finely dressed guests mingled, their laughter punctuating the live string quartet in the corner. Ethan adjusted his tie uncomfortably, feeling out of place in his borrowed suit. "This is so fancy, Dad," Lucas whispered, his eyes wide as they took in the opulence. He clung to Ethan's hand, clutching a small plate of hors d'oeuvres. Ethan smiled down at his son, his own nerves hidden behind a calm exterior. "It sure is, buddy." The decision to attend the gala had been last minute. A flyer for the event had caught Ethan's eye in the town square, mentioning a fundraiser for rural families. The logo of the organization supporting the event looked familiar. He had seen it on several donations that had quietly helped families in his community. Something about it had stuck with him, and now, standing here amidst the glittering crowd, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to find answers. As they moved through the room, Ethan's eyes scanned the crowd. He wasn't sure what or who he was looking for, but his instincts told him he would know when he saw it, and then he did. At the far end of the ballroom, near the stage, stood Charlotte. She was radiant in an emerald green gown, her hair swept into an elegant updo. She smiled politely at the people surrounding her, but even from a distance, Ethan could see the strain behind her expression. His heart pounded. He hadn't been prepared for the flood of emotions that surged through him: relief, anger, longing. She looked so poised, so perfect, and yet he could see the same vulnerability in her now that he had glimpsed on that freezing night at the church. "Dad? It's Miss Charlotte?" Lucas exclaimed, tugging on his sleeve. "I see her," Ethan said softly. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Why don't you grab another snack, buddy? I'll be right back." Lucas hesitated but nodded, disappearing toward the buffet table. Ethan squared his shoulders and made his way across the room, his steps purposeful but unhurried. As he approached, Charlotte's eyes met his, and for a moment the rest of the room seemed to fade away. "Ethan," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "Charlotte," he said, his tone even but edged with a tension he couldn't hide. "You've been busy." Charlotte blinked, her composure faltering. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," Ethan replied, gesturing around them. "But I suppose this is more your world than mine." Her eyes flickered with guilt. "Ethan, he held up a hand, cutting her off. "I need to know something. All those donations to the families in our town, the ones that showed up out of nowhere. Was that you?" Charlotte hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, it was." Ethan exhaled sharply, his emotions bubbling to the surface. "Why didn't you tell me? Why hide who you are?" "Because I was scared," Charlotte admitted, her voice trembling. "I didn't want you to see me as just another rich woman, trying to fix everything with money. I didn't want you to look at me differently." Ethan shook his head, his frustration mingling with confusion. "Do you have any idea how that feels? To let someone into your life, to trust them, only to find out they've been keeping secrets?" "I do," Charlotte said quickly, stepping closer. "And I hated lying to you, Ethan. But I didn't know how to tell you the truth without ruining everything." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You already did." Charlotte's breath hitched, but she didn't back down. "You think I didn't struggle with this? That I didn't want to tell you every single day? Ethan, I've spent my whole life being judged by what I have, not who I am. But with you, for the first time, I felt like someone saw me. The real, me." Ethan stared at her, his anger softening as her words sank in. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the vulnerability she had tried so hard to hide. The walls he had built around his heart began to crack. "You should have trusted me," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "I know," Charlotte whispered, "and I'm sorry for everything." Ethan looked away, his gaze falling to the floor as he wrestled with his emotions. He wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the sense of betrayal, but he couldn't. Deep down, he knew she hadn't lied out of malice. She had been just as scared as he was, trying to navigate a world neither of them fully understood. "Why are you here?" he asked after a long pause. "Why support our town? Why do all of this?" Charlotte hesitated, then said, "Because it mattered to you. and because I wanted to make a difference. Not as Charlotte Bennett, CEO, but as someone who cared. Her words hit him harder than he expected. Ethan felt the last of his defenses crumble as he realized the truth. She had done all of this because she cared, not just about the community, but about him. Lucas returned then, his small hand clutching a plate of cookies. "Miss Charlotte," he exclaimed, beaming. Charlotte crouched to his level, her smile trembling as she embraced him. "Hey, Lucas, I've missed you." "I missed you too," he said brightly. "Are you coming back with us?" Charlotte looked up at Ethan, her eyes searching his. "I don't know," she said softly. "That's not up to me." Ethan held her gaze for a long moment before finally nodding. "Let's talk. Somewhere quieter." Charlotte exhaled in relief, standing and following him toward the balcony. As they stepped outside, the cold night air enveloped them, but for the first time in weeks, Charlotte felt a flicker of warmth, a fragile but real hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward together. Charlotte stood in her office, the panoramic view of the city stretching out before her. The bustling world outside felt like a constant reminder of the life she had built, a life of control, precision, and relentless ambition. Yet, for the first time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, vulnerability. It wasn't a weakness, she realized, but a newfound strength. The boardroom was her battlefield that morning. The shareholders were still uneasy, and whispers of a takeover lingered. But Charlotte was resolute. She had prepared her strategy, blending sharp wit with a newfound ability to delegate. "I can't do everything on my own," she admitted during the meeting, her voice steady but sincere. "But with the right team, we can rebuild trust and ensure stability for this company's future." Her words were met with nods, her sincerity disarming even the harshest critics. It wasn't about controlling every detail anymore. It was about trusting others to shoulder the weight with her. Later that evening, Charlotte sat in her office poring over documents related to her philanthropic initiatives. Her eyes landed on a project proposal for a new community housing program. It was ambitious and would require significant collaboration, but the potential impact was enormous. The thought made her pause. There was one person she could think of who would be perfect for this. She picked up her phone and dialed Ethan's number. It rang a few times before his familiar, steady voice answered. "Charlotte?" "Hi, Ethan," she said, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. "I was hoping we could meet. I have something I want to discuss." There was a pause, and then he said, "All right, when?" "How about tomorrow? I'll come to you," she offered. "No need," Ethan replied. "I'll come to the city." The next day, Ethan arrived at Bennett Enterprises, Lucas in tow. The sight of Ethan walking into her office, his presence grounding amidst the sterile professionalism of her space, made Charlotte's heart swell. Lucas, ever curious, marveled at the sleek furniture and enormous windows. "This place is huge!" Lucas exclaimed, spinning in a circle. Charlotte crouched to his level, smiling. "It is, isn't it? But it's not as warm as your home." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, it could use some pancakes." Ethan chuckled, his eyes meeting Charlotte's. "What's this about, Charlotte?" She straightened, gesturing toward the conference table where her plans were laid out. "I want to start a community housing project. It's ambitious, and I can't do it alone. I was hoping you might consider helping me." Ethan approached, the table scanning the blueprints and proposals, his brow furrowed as he took it all in. "This is a lot," he said finally. "Why me?" "Because you understand what these communities need," Charlotte said earnestly. "You've lived it, and you have the skills to make it happen. I can provide the resources, but I need someone with your heart and vision to lead it." Ethan hesitated, his insecurities bubbling to the surface. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for something this big." "You are," Charlotte said firmly. "You just don't see it yet." Later that evening, Ethan sat in the small cafe across the street from Charlotte's building, Lucas happily devouring a slice of pie beside him. Charlotte sat across from them, her gaze steady as she watched Ethan wrestle with his decision. "Why are you doing this?" he asked finally. "Why take on something so challenging?" "Because it matters," Charlotte said simply, "and because I've spent too much of my life focused on things that don't. This project, it's not just about building homes. It's about building hope, and I can't do that without you." Ethan looked at her, his expression conflicted. He wanted to believe her, to trust that this wasn't just another corporate endeavor, but something real. And deep down he knew it was. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady, "I'll do it, but only if we do this together." Charlotte smiled, relief washing over her. "Together," she agreed. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Charlotte began laying the groundwork for the project. It wasn't without challenges. There were heated discussions, moments of doubt, and the occasional clash of perspectives. But through it all, they found a rhythm, their differences becoming their greatest strength. Charlotte's sharp business acumen and Ethan's practical understanding of community needs complemented each other in ways neither of them had anticipated. Together, they crafted plans that were not only ambitious, but also deeply rooted in compassion and practicality. Lucas often tagged along to meetings, his presence a constant reminder of why the project mattered. He would sit at the corner of the table, coloring or building small models, his innocent enthusiasm inspiring everyone around him. One evening, as they reviewed plans in Charlotte's office, Ethan leaned back in his chair, a rare smile playing on his lips. "You know, when I first met you, I never imagined we'd be here." Charlotte looked up from her notes, her eyes meeting his. "Neither did I, but I'm glad we are." Ethan nodded, his gaze softening. This feels right, like we're building something that really matters." "We are," Charlotte said quietly, "and it's because of you." Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "No, Charlotte, it's because of us." The morning light filtered softly through the window of Ethan's modest home, casting a warm glow over the dining table where Charlotte sat, sipping coffee. Lucas was perched on a stool nearby, coloring a sketch he'd been working on for days. His version of the housing project his father and Charlotte were spearheading. The simple scene felt grounding, almost surreal, as if the worlds they had lived in were finally beginning to merge. Ethan entered the room, holding a crisp envelope in his hand. His face was unreadable, a mix of apprehension and thoughtfulness that made Charlotte pause mid-sip. "What's that?" she asked, setting down her mug. Ethan glanced at the envelope, then handed it to her. "A job offer. From your company, apparently." Charlotte raised her eyebrows in surprise, pulling out the neatly folded letter. She scanned it quickly, her eyes widening as she read. The proposal was clear. Bennett Enterprises wanted Ethan to join as a lead architect on a new housing development initiative, with resources and freedom he hadn't had since his early career. "I didn't know about this," Charlotte said, her voice tinged with surprise and curiosity. "But it's incredible, Ethan. This is an amazing opportunity." Ethan sank into a chair across from her, running a hand through his hair. "It is. But I don't know, Charlotte. It's a lot to take in." Ethan leaned back, staring at the envelope, as if it held both promise and danger. "It's been years since I've worked on anything like this. I left that life behind for a reason. Taking this job, it feels like stepping into a world I'm not sure I belong to anymore." Charlotte reached out, placing a hand on his. "Ethan, you've already proven you belong. The work you've done with the community project, it's been incredible. You have the talent and the passion. This isn't about stepping into my world. It's about building one that belongs to both of us." Ethan's eyes softened at her words, but doubt lingered. I'm worried about Lucas, our life here. It's simple, steady. What if this disrupts everything he's used to? You're his anchor, Charlotte said firmly. As long as you're there, Lucas will thrive. And he's proud of you. Ethan, you've inspired him more than you realize. Ethan's gaze shifted to Lucas, who was humming quietly as he colored. The boy glanced up and grinned. Look, Dad, it's the house you showed me last week. Ethan smiled faintly, the innocence of his son's enthusiasm tugging at his heart. You think so, huh? You think it's good enough? It's awesome, Lucas exclaimed, holding up the drawing proudly. Charlotte chuckled, her eyes warm, as she watched the exchange. See? Even Lucas knows you're capable of this. Later that evening, Ethan found himself pacing the small living room, the letter still in his hand. Charlotte watched him silently for a moment before standing and crossing the room to join him. Talk to me, she said gently. What's holding you back? Ethan sighed, leaning against the wall. It's not just about the job. It's about everything. I've spent so much of my life trying to protect Lucas, to keep things simple and stable for him. Taking this job feels risky. Ethan, Charlotte said, her voice steady but full of emotion. Life is always going to have risks, but sometimes the greatest risks lead to the most meaningful rewards. You've spent so long putting everyone else first. Maybe it's time to take a chance on yourself. He looked at her, the weight of her words settling over him. And what about us? If I take this job, if I step into this world, will it change what we have? Charlotte stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. What we have isn't about where you work or what you do. It's about who we are together. And no matter what you decide, I'll be here, Ethan, always. Her words were like a balm to his restless mind, soothing the fears that had been gnawing at him. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that he could have both, a fulfilling career and a life rooted in love and stability. The next morning, Ethan sat at the dining table with Lucas, the job offer letter spread out before them. Lucas watched him with wide, curious eyes. Dad, are you going to take the job? Lucas asked, his voice filled with the kind of innocent curiosity that only a child could have. Ethan hesitated, then smiled. What do you think, buddy? Should I give it a shot? Lucas's face lit up. Yeah, you're awesome at building stuff, Dad, and Miss Charlotte said you're the best architect ever. Ethan chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. She said that, huh? Lucas nodded enthusiastically. Yup, and she's super smart, so she must be right. Ethan's smile softened as he looked at his son. Lucas's faith in him was unshakable, and it gave him the strength he needed to make his decision. Later that day, Ethan called Charlotte. I'm in, he said simply. Let's do this. Her response was immediate and full of warmth. You won't regret it, Ethan. I promise. As the weeks passed, Ethan threw himself into the new role, balancing the demands of the job with his responsibilities as a father. It wasn't always easy, but the support of both Lucas and Charlotte made all the difference. Together, they found a rhythm, a partnership built on trust, respect, and love. The first few days were daunting, but as Ethan reviewed blueprints and collaborated with Charlotte's team, he felt a long, dormant part of himself awaken. The creative spark that had once defined him as an architect was back, stronger than ever. Charlotte, too, found herself inspired by Ethan's dedication and grounded perspective. His presence brought a new energy to the project, reminding her of why she had embarked on this journey in the first place. One evening, as they walked through the nearly completed housing development, Ethan turned to Charlotte, his expression thoughtful. You were right, he said, about everything. Taking this job, stepping out of my comfort zone, it was the right thing to do. Charlotte smiled, slipping her hand into his. I never doubted you. Ethan looked at her, his heart full. "Thank you, Charlotte, for believing in me, for helping me believe in myself." She squeezed his hand, her gaze steady. "We did this together, Ethan, and this is just the beginning." The air was crisp and filled with the faint scent of pine as snowflakes drifted gently to the ground. The church, once a humble sanctuary, now stood as a vibrant community center, its new facade illuminated by strings of twinkling lights. Inside, the warm hum of laughter and conversation echoed off the freshly painted walls. Charlotte stood near the entrance, her emerald green dress a subtle nod to the gown she had worn the night Ethan found her again. She watched as Lucas darted between the tables, carrying a tray of cookies he was determined to deliver to every guest. Her heart swelled as she took in the scene. A mosaic of people from Ethan's town, families who had benefited from the housing project, and even members of her corporate team now mingling as if they had always belonged together. "Looks like we pulled it off," Ethan said, his voice warm as he appeared at her side. Charlotte turned to him, smiling. He was dressed simply, his suit neatly pressed but modest, yet he looked every bit the leader she had always believed him to be. "We did," she replied, her voice soft. "But it wasn't just us. This—" She gestured around the room. "This is everyone." Ethan nodded, his blue eyes scanning the room. "Still, it's a good feeling, knowing we helped make it happen." Charlotte followed his gaze, her smile deepening. "It's more than I ever imagined." As the evening continued, Ethan and Charlotte found themselves sitting at a table near the front of the room. A small group of townspeople had taken to the stage to sing carols, their voices blending harmoniously in a way that brought a sense of calm over the bustling celebration. "Do you ever think about that night?" Ethan asked, his voice low as he leaned toward Charlotte. "Which night?" she replied, though her knowing smile suggested she already knew the answer. "The night I found you on those church steps," Ethan said, his tone reflective. "You looked so lost." Charlotte chuckled softly, though there was a trace of emotion in her voice. "I was lost, in more ways than one." "And now?" Ethan asked, his gaze steady. She turned to him, her expression softening. "Now I feel found, not just by this place or this community, but by you. By Lucas. You gave me a home I didn't even know I was searching for." Ethan reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "You gave me the courage to believe in myself again, to dream bigger than I thought I could." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the music wrapping around them like a gentle embrace. Lucas appeared then, breathless and beaming. "Dad! Miss Charlotte! You have to come see the snow outside. It's perfect for snowballs." Ethan grinned, ruffling Lucas's hair. "All right, buddy, let's go." Outside, the snow had blanketed the ground in a pristine white layer. Lucas was already crouched, forming a snowball with the precision of a seasoned expert. He launched it at Ethan, laughing as it hit his father squarely on the arm. "Oh, you're in trouble now," Ethan called, scooping up a handful of snow. Charlotte laughed as the two began their playful battle, their laughter echoing into the night. She stood to the side, her hands tucked into her coat pockets, watching the scene with a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "Don't think you're safe," Ethan called, his eyes sparkling with mischief. He tossed a snowball in her, direction missing intentionally, but making his point clear. Charlotte laughed, finally giving in and joining the fray. For a few minutes the three of them played as though the rest of the world didn't exist, their laughter blending with the soft crunch of snow beneath their feet. When the game finally ended, they stood together, breathless and smiling. Lucas reached for Charlotte's hand, holding it tightly as if she were already a permanent part of their family. As the three of them walked back toward the church, their footsteps crunching softly in the snow, Ethan slowed his pace. He turned to Charlotte, his expression thoughtful. This year has been unexpected, he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. I never thought I'd find someone who could step into my world the way you have. Charlotte stopped, her breath visible in the cold air. And I never thought I'd find a world I wanted to stay in, she said quietly. But with you and Lucas, it feels like I've finally found where I belong. Ethan reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. So, what do you say we keep building this world together? One step at a time. Charlotte smiled, her eyes shining. I'd like that. Lucas tugged on their joined hands, looking up at them with a wide grin. Does this mean we're a team now? Ethan and Charlotte exchanged a glance, their smiles matching. Yeah, buddy, Ethan said. We're a team. Back inside the church-turned community center, the celebration was still in full swing. Charlotte and Ethan stood side by side, watching as the people they had come to care for laughed and danced. Lucas ran off to join a group of children decorating cookies, his joyful laughter carrying across the room. Ethan turned to Charlotte, his gaze soft. Thank you for believing in me, in us. Charlotte leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. We believed in each other. As the night continued, the snow fell gently outside, blanketing the world in quiet beauty. Inside, the warmth of love, community, and hope filled the air. Though the future was unwritten, it was clear that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The story ended not with finality, but with promise of love, of unity, and of the strength found in embracing change. Before we continue the story, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know. It's always exciting to connect with story lovers from all around the world. If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss another heartwarming tale. We're here to share stories that inspire, touch your heart, and remind you of the beauty in life. Let's build a warm, uplifting community together. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.